Hello and welcome to Reanimated. This is episode 252. My name is Stuart, one of your hosts. Joining me is the other half of this equation from Brooklyn, New York, H.A. Conrad.
Hello.
Good morning, madam.
Good morning.
We are here to talk about the balance of Betaal today, episodes 3 and 4. Nice new Netflix miniseries out of India. But before we do that, we've got a little bit of news to talk about. So I think we will kick this party off with a little COVID roundup. So let me just quickly talk about the top 5, which is actually, there's a new player in the top 5 this week, which is a shame. Anytime that happens, it's not cause for celebration.
Nope.
Number 1 is still the USA. Hooray, go us. Number 2, Brazil. 3, Russia. 4, United Kingdom. The sole representative for Europe now, which used to be
Italy.
The top 5. Oh yeah, and Italy and Spain were up there ahead of UK, but now UK is 4th, and 5th, India.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a bummer, and I don't see that going great.
Well, I know that they were very worried about just because of, I know they were trying to, there was like a lot of debate about what was going to happen if it started to really take hold there, and it seems like that's what it's done. And it's pretty scary because I just think from a resources point of view, and I mean, I have never been there, you have been there, but the housing is so close. It's even more dense than New York. So it's just in terms of being able to even move around and it's basically, I just think I hope it doesn't get worse, but it seems like it might. And I just, this is almost exactly what they were talking about when they were talking about countries, like in terms of hospitals and things like that. They just don't have the resources. Brazil, similarly, although I think Brazil's in a slightly better position than India. But it's to see these countries going into like Brazil at number 3, and they think that is actually like they think that the cases are underrepresented because they've been kind of keeping a tight lid on that. So I don't know. I just worry when I see these countries starting to creep up in that list. And look, in the U.S., I think there is a little bit more widespread testing. We've been seeing cities open up, and you have been seeing a spike in cases depending on where you are. I think Florida saw a spike. Georgia has definitely seen a spike. And then in some of the good news category, at least yesterday, New York dropped to the lowest number of cases since the start of the pandemic. So I think as of yesterday, statewide, the number of deaths was at 35 people, which is like the peak was around 800 at the peak of all of this in April. And then across the state, it's been, I think, 24,000 deaths. And then hospitalizations on Friday were down to 2,600, and that's down from the record high of like around almost 19,000 during the peak of the crisis. So
deaths are down to 670 nationwide in the last 24 hours for the U.S.,
yep.
But the number of new confirmed cases is basically still above 20,000, and it very rarely goes below 20,000. So I think we're basically plateaued, but we're certainly not out of the woods.
Well, and that's the thing, is that restrictions here in New York are loosening. They did phase 1 and into phase 2 of essential businesses, like dentists were able to open up or are able to open up other than for other appointments versus just emergencies. Hair salons are going to be opening up with specific restrictions in place. And, I think it's good that things are opening up, but I've also noticed that there's a lot more sort of lax behavior. Fewer masks out on the street. People, like, when they're waiting, there's definitely less than 6 feet there. Like, there's a coffee shop in my neighborhood, which I love, and they have basically set up a system so that, their people are at the front. They allow one person sort of into the vestibule who puts their order in. The people at the store are behind glass or plastic, and then everybody else is waiting in line like out on the street, and they're supposed to stay 6 feet apart, but they're kind of not. So so I think that's just like, I think people are like, okay, well, as long as I have my mask on, I'm fine. And so it's a kind of interesting thing.
I have the feeling we're at 1,900 and we're at 1,920,000 cases basically right now.
Yep.
And with our current, even though the number of confirmed new cases kind of rises and falls throughout the week because of when testing is accomplished, I have a suspicion that we're going to hit 2 million by the end of next week. Or no, sorry, by the end of next week, if you consider Sunday not to be the beginning of the week like a lot of people do. Yep. I'm a British person at heart, so I like to think of Sunday being the last day of the week. However, by next weekend, I think there's going to be a spike based on all of the people out and about in the last week. And
I mean, look, it's been look there as you and I talked about last week, the build up to the protests isn't surprising given what's been happening, and given how just this is like a long time coming, honestly. And I think because of the pandemic and because of the fact that, people, this is just such an important issue and people are out there. And you do see, I mean, look, the majority of people, again, are wearing masks and they're out there and they're trying to be as socially distant as possible. But these are massive crowds and they are very dense. And, it's like, I think, and I saw, like, I had a bunch of friends at the marches in DC yesterday. There's more protests going on here in New York. And look, we're going to be there, but we're also going to be practicing social distancing with masks and stuff like that. But you kind of have to balance out what is sort of the level of risk. And I think people feel like the risk is worth the risk right now. And, New York had been in a pretty, like, there's some pretty bad, just terrible things going on. And it was kind of, in terms of where like protests were happening, they have been peaceful. The majority have been peaceful. And it seems, at least from when you're like when the curfew was put in place, it was weird because like there were some nights when the police were just letting people peacefully march through Brooklyn and Manhattan. And then there were nights when it was like, I don't know, like getting into past the curfew, and then they started arresting people really violently and doing pepper spray and all this other stuff. And I mean, I guess you could argue that, they were breaking curfew, but if the purpose of the curfew was to stop, violence and looting and stuff like that, then I'm not sure that you have a leg to stand on if you're the ones that are causing the violence. So, but in any case, yesterday was a day of peaceful protests across the city, in every borough, and today is going to be the same. And early this morning, we got notice that the curfew had been lifted for today, and it had been supposed to be in place this evening too, and they have stopped that. So
I even had a mini version in my little town here. We had about 500 or 600 people protesting on Thursday night, and I've been seeing a lot of kind of irate emails and essays about the the thinking behind using pepper spray and tear gas during a respiratory outbreak, like making people snot and cry and cough and in crowds with one another, and how that is pretty kind of
Well, I mean, the other thing that had been happening here in New York is that, so basically the court systems are slowed down quite a bit because of the pandemic, but also because of some of these arrests. They have
where are you putting them?
Well, exactly. And people, there is supposed to be a time limit to the amount of time you're allowed to hold people. That has definitely not been the case. And people were have been basically packed in to prisons without, or like jails without masks and in really horrible conditions. And I think everybody is very concerned that we're going to see a spike in a couple of weeks because of this type of behavior. There are a lot of legal entities and firms and groups that have gotten together to try to get this situation under control and getting people out of there. And in fact, basically they were releasing a lot of people and declining to prosecute the protesters that had been arrested for the most part, but not everybody. And then it was like, well, how are you making that distinction? So, it's if they were being I think they were trying to say if they'd been arrested for just breaking curfew, they were trying to let them out. But so basically, this is across the entire city, and I think that you will see spikes, and this is being mirrored everywhere. So in DC and other places too. So I think we are going to see a spike in a couple of weeks, which is it's just disheartening. But I also, I think it's definitely this is just one of the weirdest times I think we've all been through, and I think we will
saying it mildly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think
it's gonna be there's gonna be a spike. I don't think you're wrong, and I think that it's gonna be, I don't know which is more tragic to happen in New York, where you have basically brought your new cases way down from the peak, and you're like, it looks, if you look at your graph, your parabola is on the receding side. Or in somewhere like LA, where there were also a lot of riots and protests, where they've never really successfully brought that under control, and it could just continue to skyrocket.
Right. And so, I mean, I think we just have to wait and see. But I also, again, this is so important that people are willing to put their lives at risk because of this. And there have been a lot of commentary.
It's that, and it's that people, I think, no longer really take coronavirus that seriously. Despite what we've, because it's been 14 weeks and people are just all at the end of their ropes, is my take. Well,
but anyway, we'll keep updating. Hopefully, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. And the one place I was going to, like, Florida has definitely skyrocketed in terms of cases, and that was even ahead of all of the protests. And that was. They have been the most sort of, as we know, I mean, in terms of what their policies had been, they had been the most lenient, and basically kept pointing to Sweden as what they were trying to model there.
Meanwhile, Sweden has apologized this week for
saying
that they didn't do it right.
Yep.
But they still don't have a huge caseload.
No,
they do have a pretty high death rate.
They do have a high death rate, and they especially have a high death rate in nursing homes. So the most vulnerable were really affected by this. Anyway, that is the COVID news for the day, but not all of it, obviously. It's just an ongoing thing. And like, I think we have to see what happens, but I mean, I think, again, here in one thing I was going to mention, I don't know if you saw this news, but I'm assuming that we will be seeing, I thought California schools, like colleges and universities had already basically announced this, but basically they're saying that the fall semester will be remote and online, because they don't want to spread more, and they're assuming that there will be a resurgence, and I think almost everybody is assuming that. And basically college campuses are one of the biggest like hotbeds of the sort of spreading this kind of thing. So they're trying to avoid that.
The higher learning institutions that basically really close to the beginning of this thing, or at least when we started taking it seriously as a nation, they just shut it down and sent all the kids home. And I think that was a smart move, because all schools are basically just giant incubators, petri dishes. Right. And here I am waiting to see if there's going to be an elementary school coming up in this fall.
Right.
And there's a lot of different scenarios getting kind of bandied about still that include distance learning, but honestly, like, little kids and distance learning, it's not a combo that works for education, in my opinion. And I'm really hoping that we can just come up with ways to have like really rigorous cleaning and stable cohorts, and have these kids actually still get an education in person, because I just don't think that they're going to be not in my house anyway, learning a great deal if they're stuck at home still.
I mean, the other thing is that they need each other. Like, they need to see other little kids, because like my nephews are in upstate New York, and they haven't seen any kids for a very long time. And then they did have they had their cousins, I guess, came up, and they had been quarantining, so they were allowed to actually hang out with them. And apparently my older nephew was like so ecstatic, like just couldn't even deal with being around other kids because he was so excited about it.
It's a
And
huge deal for
like he
them.
doesn't, and he like doesn't want to go to, like, I get it, he like doesn't want to go to sleep. He's like totally, he's because he was like afraid that if he went to sleep, like that he wouldn't be allowed to play with them the next day. So like, you
Only
know,
child.
no, he's got a sibling, but it's not the same,
Yeah.
it's not the same as seeing other kids your own age and that kind of thing. So I feel for parents on this one.
My kids start camp tomorrow.
Oh
Which
really?
is kind of crazy. Yeah, we are my wife and I are basically over the moon. Also a little bit concerned, but they've shown us their plan, and it's going to be it's going to be stable groups of 12 with the same teachers. They're going to have their own classroom, their own outdoor space where they will have, outdoor activities and their own bathroom. So really trying to like minimize,
Yeah.
at least in their group. Of course, once you bring 12 different kids together, that is a huge increase of our bubble.
Yep.
And we have no control over what those kids and their families are doing at their homes. So it is risk, but we also have our community spread in the Sonoma County is now down to 17% of all cases, which is great because we know where the cases are happening through contact tracing, and so it gives me confidence that there would not be an outbreak, or the odds of there being an outbreak in my town without me knowing about it are low.
Yeah.
The
other thing I was going to mention is that so California schools had said they were going to do online learning. So Harvard Law actually just announced that they are doing the fall semester entirely remotely, and that's a really big deal. I'm assuming all the other law schools are going to follow suit. But the interesting thing is that they basically said that they froze the tuition from last year, but I don't know. I think it puts the students into a very difficult position. So I guess we'll have to see what happens. I think they gave students an option to pause, basically, and not attend if they didn't want to do just the remote learning and pay $68,000, which is what the tuition is for the year.
It's probably a good experience to learn how to do litigating through Zoom or whatever, right? Because it's going to be the way things are done for a while.
Well, I mean, but you can argue that, like, that's a tough pill to swallow, I think. Yes, I think I think the majority are probably just going to go through with it just because they don't want to delay their graduation. But I also think that it's a tough decision. That said, I think Harvard Law made the decision they had to keep people safe. I think they looked at everything. They looked at what epidemiologists are saying and came to the conclusion that they couldn't safely bring people back. I'm not sure if this is Harvard University as a whole, but I'm guessing that probably that is what's going to happen.
You think the schools have that much independence in their ability, like autonomy?
Well, I mean, they are technically a different entity, so it's yes, they are part of the university as a whole, but I think each school was kind of making their own policy, and I know that some ideas had been floated from a couple of the universities just about like, okay, well, we'll do an in-person semester, but we're going to stagger the number of students, so X number of students come in for this amount of time, and then the next come in, and we're like condensing the semester. So I guess they were trying to float like some hybrid ideas where it would be basically half in person and half online. That hadn't been basically announced and then the Harvard Law announcement came. So I think that probably most schools are going to move to that model, because if Harvard's doing it, then I think and it honestly, with them announcing so early, I think it gives other schools cover to do it to some extent.
I think a lot of schools have to, though, also because all these poor graduating seniors who, by the way, Friday was our graduation for the local high school. And they, early in the morning, they basically did a drive-through graduation ceremony with their parents like honking from their car as they got to stand on a podium for a few seconds. Somebody reads their name. I don't know how they got their diploma. And then they're off to college and have no idea what that's going to look like next year, even more so than, ordinary graduating high school seniors. So there's just a lot of question marks, and we're going to have to get to the end of the journey to figure out what it's going to look like, and we'll see.
All right. Well, I think, I think that, look, this is going to be one of those times in history that leaves just an incredible mark on everybody who has experienced it. And I think especially those students that have graduated from high school and are going into college, and also are graduating from college and from law school and are entering the world during this time, I think you're going to see this just as this, like, there is no way that this isn't this, basically this incredible, like, none of us have ever experienced any of this. I think this is to me, like, I don't know that I can point to anything that matches this. And I think, for example, my grandparents used to always talk about the Great Depression. And to me, this is one of those events that is going to stay with people, and impact people and impact.
God, we're never going to shut up about this.
Yeah.
2020. Oh, let me tell you.
Right.
It's gonna be rough for all of our descendants.
Yes.
And every generation that comes after us, for sure.
Right. But in any case, let's talk about the news items that we have in terms of zombie news and other stuff. Other stuff. And then
I want to speak to and then we're going to get into Betaal, but I do want to speak to how the Sith are jerks up front, because a total 180 from what we're talking about right now.
Well, okay. Yeah, it is. So let's
read this book, Red Harvest. I recommend it. Basically, I read it because it was a zombie novel and because it's a Star Wars zombie novel, and I'm sorry, but you got your cream cheese in my whatever that commercial is. It's a great combination that tastes great together. And so it's set during the Old Republic times.
By the way, I think it's peanut butter, yes, and not cream cheese.
I think it's cream cheese and peanut butter. I don't know.
No, it's chocolate. It's chocolate and peanut butter, man. It's like Reese's. Reese's. Anyway.
I hate Reese's. Anyway.
What?
The Sith, apparently, and in this book, Red Harvest, and then in this article from, is it comicbook.com or CBR, they detail how there's actually more than one zombie novel, and now I need to go and find Death Troopers, which is the second version that comes millennia after the first story. Basically, the Sith want to live forever. We know that they're bad men, and they play around with things like eternal life and bringing the dead back to life, as Darth Sidious tried to convince Anakin, or basically did convince him during right before he became a bad man. In Red Harvest, it's basically a Sith Academy world, which is also just a cool thing to think about, like, a bunch of Sith getting along and learning how to be jerks together. And their headmaster is running some test experiment for everlasting life, and unwittingly turns everybody into zombies. And so hilarity ensues. It was a great read.
So I have a question for you. So is this supposed to be why they're kind of doing their being brought back in everlasting? Is this sort of the origin story of that, or is this just sort of another tangent of that particular type of story?
I read this book many years ago. It could be that the head of the school, I think his name was Darth Dreth or something like that, he could have been recreating something that he found in ancient texts, but that's not described in another book. So I consider Red Harvest to be the origin story for Sith and zombies. Certainly this article refers to the resultant plague as the sickness, and how it is brought back again. The same phenomenon is brought back again during the time of Darth Vader. It's just pretty cool. So you have to eat the beating heart of a Jedi who's been infected with the sickness, but before they've reanimated. That's like the key to everlasting life. But apparently everybody who tries it ends up turning into a zombie.
Well, that's a lot of steps. A lot of stuff to
First
coordinate.
You gotta get yourself a Jedi.
I mean,
step one is already pretty tough, I would imagine.
All right. Well, Siths are jerks. I think we can all agree on that. Next up, we had talked about this film a little bit before because we saw a trailer for it. This is a Belgian zombie film taking place in a plastic surgery clinic, and it is called Yummy. It is going to be released on Shudder on June 25th, which I'm very excited about. I mean, we saw the trailer. They seem to have mixed it up quite a bit with this thing, but I'm definitely excited to watch it. I think that this just makes me more excited to watch it, but I think that we'll have to add this to our roster of things to review.
For sure. especially during this time of production cycles getting all
Right.
interrupted. We probably have a long way to go before we know how things are going to shake out for Walking Dead and whatnot later this year. So the more things that can get released this summer, the more happy Reanimated is.
Yes. And then to that end, Peninsula, Train to Busan sequel, the posters have been released. The posters have been released, and they look pretty cool. So we're excited on that. About that. Do we have a date yet for this?
I don't think a date has been released for this film. No, but I mean, just the fact that they're still pumping out new stuff, like even if it's something like posters, which I don't know. I don't know that you really care about posters all the time. They've so far we've gotten a trailer, a teaser really, and then these posters. So you know what? That's progress. So I'll take it.
Yep. So I think we're ready to jump into our second half of this Netflix miniseries, the Betaal series. This is episodes 3 and 4, and
episodes, and they're entitled "The Battle" and "The Colonel."
Right. And where we left our group of the Betaz or Baz, is it Baz?
Baz Squad.
Yeah. Baz Squad. It had been, basically there's a little creepy drummer boy outside the barracks that they have locked themselves in ancient barracks. And lots of stuff going on. I mean, they've got Hawk, who has totally become a zombie, and we've also
fangs
got
now.
Well, so it's interesting. Like, they then showed the Betaal idol, and so they're all people are becoming the zombies, or not all of them, but most of them are starting to have the features of that particular like the idol or the demon idol or whatever it is, with the teeth coming out in different ways. And we actually have the name of the woman from the village now that has been helping them out and is so very knowledgeable, and her name is Punya, but I don't know that we ever hear the name of her husband.
Dead guy, I think is.
Yes, yeah. But in any case, I felt like the pacing of both of these was a little bit off, like a little bit long. It didn't feel quite as, I felt like, especially the first episode, it was like they jumped right into everything and got underway really quickly. These two episodes, to me, it felt like they were repeating a lot of different themes. I don't know how you felt about it.
It's partially down to the set, right? They're stuck in these barracks, and while they do seem to be able to get lost in there, and people could kind of move around with impunity and not be seen or heard until they're right up on you or whatever, it's a little bit, it gets a little tired that they're stuck in the same set.
Yep. And the themes that they keep sort of revisiting, we've seen some flashbacks, and they start to make a lot more sense, and you learn the backstory a little bit more with Vikram. There are some super creepy things going on, with, possession, and, so we talked a little bit about the effects of the zombies and the effects in this, and I appreciate a good practical effect and the makeup and things like that, but I do feel like how they executed some of this took away from it to some extent. It was definitely, but I mean, I felt like maybe they were going for more Evil Dead, maybe, in terms of the tone. Like specifically, like the drummer boy, who they show multiple times, looks like kind of animatronic, and then they show the soldiers, and to me they're far less scary because of the makeup and the sort of way they went with the effects. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I think they took a shot and missed, but they were trying to make them look scary, and I mean, there's a scene in this first episode, the third episode that we're talking about here, where Hawk is like, look at me, look into my eyes and tell me that I'm not your cousin. And
you're like, yeah, you're probably not.
like his makeup, Tiagi's even to a much lesser extent, and then later Alu, after she gets zombified, they look scarier than the redcoats for sure. And I think like the show must, the people running the show must know, they know how to make scary looking zombies. They just went with these kind of like oversized big eyes things that. Yeah, maybe it's just I don't know what to put it down to. But
well,
yeah,
I mean,
the red coats don't look as scary as they
well,
should.
what I kind of was reading, what I read into it was that, and I agree with you. I mean, I think that they focus the most, like, the scariest effects on the people that you know the most as a character. So obviously, Hawk and Tiagi and Alu are all going to be a lot scarier because we've known them as human, and I think part of why, like, I think they were almost trying to make the soldiers look a little bit more just like more automatons, and closer to what the idol looks like, what the demon statue looks like. And it just didn't quite make it there for me. But, you know, and again, like, this is a grand tradition of zombie films, and especially Evil Dead. It's like there's a level of cheesiness that you kind of sometimes want to embrace. But I just felt like, given the level of effects with Alu and Tiagi and Hawk, it didn't quite match up. But, you know, the different themes that they're kind of running into here is Vikram's backstory about, and in the themes in general, there's like a lot going on here that they're dealing with. So there's Vikram's, whether he is a good soldier. A lot, they use this and repeat that phrase like 10,000 different times. This is something that is used, and he's been, you know, we definitely know that something happened with him and the little girl on the last mission, that Tiagi had been the commanding officer. Obviously, we knew something really bad happened, though they do a little bit of a bait and switch where he kind of lies to Sanvi about it. So that is a theme that is present throughout this. And not just him, but we have Alu, who has always been sort of the voice of reason. Not sort of, she has been. Even from when they invaded this village and were relocating people, she basically had been saying to Vikram all along, no, we don't need to do this, and this is wrong. And so she is definitely the conscience here, and is like, no, we need to do the right things and not just take orders. And that is something that they also repeat quite a bit about a good soldier taking orders, or they were just following orders. It happens in several different conversations throughout the film. So that's also a part of this. The other piece of this is the themes, like with Sanvi, the little girl who is the daughter of our non-hero, Mudhalvin. And she basically has said, we saw her calling out her dad and her uncle much earlier because she saw that they did something, that they were the ones who set off the explosive.
She basically gets her ass beat in this episode for her forthrightness.
Right, and she calls her dad a bad man. She also has an exchange with Alu about the fact that her dad always wanted a son and that she's a strong girl. And we also see this with Punya. Like, so Punya is basically the person with the knowledge about these zombies, and so we see women taking a very like front center role here in terms of this battle. Alu, and I mean, we've seen this throughout the series, but in these two episodes it really, and not just women who are in uniform. So that's another theme that's definitely present in these last two episodes.
Punya's does get developed through these last two episodes, and they also pair up Punya with Akbar, who up until basically in this third episode, he's still kind of just a ornery jerk, but basically through his experience and the pairing up with Punya, I think he really comes around and softens as a character until he's kind of redeemed for being a J-hole by the end of the series, which is nice.
Yeah.
And she's just a little badass. I like Punya a lot. I like the way she talks. She's got a lot of moxie, and she seems to take no guff from nobody. So,
right. And also
props.
there's also the theme, like she basically all along has been like, hey, you need to burn the bodies. They do this with two of the soldiers that had turned. She is about to just do this to Hawk, and Akbar won't let her, and is basically being really threatening to her. And eventually he comes around, not because, well, I mean, he keeps saying like, what I promised Auntie that I would take care of Hawk, and Hawk is like terrifying. I mean, I feel like the makeup job done on him is amazing, and he's like, you always, at least I was having these moments every time Akbar was getting close to him, I was just like, move back up. This isn't a good idea.
He's not very well secured. Like,
No, I was
at
like,
various points,
oh,
Hawk is getting up and like moving all of his arms and legs, and
yep.
I mean he's hissing and he can't like apparently can't move away from the wall. But those chains are very, very loose.
Right.
And I have to wonder what they were thinking.
Well, I think they were thinking that it would make us feel super uncomfortable because there were all these scenes, and it was done well. I mean, well done, director. But there were all these scenes where Akbar is standing there and Hawk's like kind of in the background behind him. And every time that happened, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to like pull away from the wall and get him. And I have to admit, I did not expect Akbar to survive this whole thing. Like, so I really thought that he was going to get taken out, and there is that level of tension throughout about it's like the people that we know that have turned into zombies, and also like one of the worst ones is also Sanvi's mother. That was God. That was pretty rough.
That's a strong scene, and that's in this episode too.
Yeah.
It's, well, at the very end, because her mother basically is the dragging and the nails on chalkboard stuff.
And it's done. Yeah. And I have to say, like, that tension that they created with those scenes with Sanvi. I mean, Sanvi's a kid. She's locked in this room. And, you know, she's had a lot going on, this kid. Like, she's been beaten by her dad, who basically is going to try to sacrifice her to Colonel, or to Line Doc. And she's had the creepy interactions with Tyagi, who is possessed by this like weird British dude, and she's seen this. Her dad's kind of like reading out of this terrifying book about the sacrifice of a young virgin, and then he's like, but I'm sure that's just a joke. And I mean, there's like these moments where this kid has just been, in terms of like trust, it's amazing that she trusts any adult.
Yeah, but when he's reading out of the book and he's basically describing Tiagi's symptoms, like hair whitened, a pronounced stoop, and that scene when Sanvi can suddenly see Line Doc behind Tyagi, I thought that was basically it's like hardly even an effect. Like the actor was just probably sitting behind the woman playing Tyagi, and they had the shadow on him, and maybe they put some lights in his eyes because his eyes are glinty. I thought that was a really effective effect.
No, it was totally good, even as he's reading it. And then, you know, you just see this this girl. She's like, yeah, I'm totally creeped out by this. And the way the actor who's playing Tyagi, she is really creepy. And she does a really good job at making you fear for Sanvi. So, you know, Sanvi ends up locked in this room, and, you know, she's had exchanges with Alu about. And Alu basically saying, she never shares exactly what the story is, but Alu says she's been through things and points to her own scars on her face and basically tells Sanvi, look, you need to stay locked in here and you'll be safe in here. Don't go into that other room because, like, the body of her mom is in there. And only open the door to me or to Vikram. And, you know, it's really tough on this kid. I mean, she's got her dad trying to break in, although I think him beating her before and her general opinion of him makes it clear she's not going to let him in.
Like, the last interaction they had was him beating her.
Right.
And then he comes and he's like, because when he's trying to make his deal with Tyagi and Line Doc, he's like, let me show you how useful I can be. Daughter, open this door. She's like, no, you're a bad man.
Yeah.
I thought that was actually... Like we talked about last time, there are some. It's hard to tell if it's unintentional. I think it's intentional, but very like the delivery is just very straight.
Yep.
But there are hilarious moments in this show. Another one being, and this is very thematic, Kalshal, the final hardly named, barely given any lines member of Boz Squad, other than our few heroes, is looking out at the drummer boy and complaining that the white man has. First they took their land and their gold and their jobs, and now they took our goddamn evil spirits.
Right.
And it's just like, yes, that's
like cultural appropriation to the max. And yeah, so we've got there's definitely those moments where, and because they play it so straight, it actually makes it funnier. Yeah. And then, you know, Sanvi's dad. I mean, I will say the one piece that I object to in sort of how the storytelling went is that I totally do not believe that Sanvi's dad would have taken out Alu. I think she's too badass for that. I wish they had done that in a different way. But, I mean, we do have her, you know, she's found out what that the whole reason that they're there is actually because Tiagi had been paid off by the corporation, that this has all been just a farce, and that the Boz squad has been led astray by Tiagi, and it's interesting. And so I don't know, so that whole thing, like, it bothered me because it feels weird to me that Vikram wouldn't believe her. And maybe he's a little, we do see a little bit where he's almost like hypnotized by Tiagi
a few times, and then finally absolutely he gets it's like the zombies seem to have an ability. At least Hawk also kind of hypnotizes Akbar a little bit too. But he starts whimpering about Auntie. So Sirohi can get hypnotized, and Akbar both do. The bit where they're like, there were no rebels or no partisans here, this was all just a bunch of BS. But then in the final episode, Punia basically admits to being a partisan, and she's like, we were going to wipe you guys all out. And it's like, okay, well, pick one, guys. Either they're innocents or not, I guess. You can have it be both ways. But it's a little bit odd that they're part of their like moral story in this is that Mudhalvan made up this thing about there being rebels here to bring in Boz Squad, and then but that was not true. And then you can't have them Punia saying we were ready to destroy the army. Well, I don't know, it just seems a little bit.
Yeah, and so that felt weird to me, but hey, I mean, I think that they needed to have some reason why she had a ton of explosives.
They did have quite a few pipe bombs lying around the village, apparently.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think they did a lot with the set, and they finally got them out of the barracks, and their big plan, because, you know, I do like that Vikram's like, hey, I gotta go and take care of Lindock, although I didn't expect him to totally, like, I kind of thought, you know, the fact that he had been almost hypnotized before, I thought that he would be somehow more resistant to it, and apparently not. Even Sanvi's like trying to break in doesn't help. And so that really bothered me.
Yeah, like, why isn't he more cautious about this? He's like, I felt myself weakening in the third episode. In the fourth episode, he lets her talk to him instead of just shooting her.
Right.
And it does feel a little bit like, okay, well, you deserve it. You're a big dummy. We've got other scenes in this third episode where they're holding off the big horde, where all the zombies break in to the barracks. And honestly, I thought this was a very exciting episode for that reason. It's probably the most zombies we get in the third episode. And but one thing that it was a major gaffe for me was they tampered with the audio for their weapons. So these guys are using some sort of M16 or M4. I think it's an M16. It does not sound like a heavy like a 50 caliber machine gun, which is the audio that they're using, especially for Kaushal's or Kushal's weapon. It is identical to the rifles that the other people are using, but his sounds like a 50 cal, which is way bigger than the rifles that they're actually using. I mean, I think this happens probably a lot in films and TV, but it was for me, it was just like, that is absurd. He does not have a giant machine gun. That is just a rifle, and it should not sound that way. However,
I could not make that distinction, but I did note that they were all the same. So
I kept reversing in the on Netflix, and then I pulled up some video of 4 or 5 different machine guns, if you must know, to find out which one it was.
I did look, when they storm the barracks and they're inside the barracks, I did like the exchanges between, I thought that they did, you know, they have Punya and Akbar stuck in one part. They've got Sanvi and Vikram and her uncle, and of course Tiagi in the other part of the barracks. And you know, they're both dealing with the onslaught of the zombies. And there are some pretty, again, they have it's supposed to be some of the scarier pieces, but they do add some levity into it, which is like, not, I mean, it's terrifying levity, but like, you know, Akbar's calling, they managed to retrieve the walkie-talkie, and he's calling Vikram and basically being like, we don't even have 5 minutes left. And then, you know, Vikram's like, yeah, we'll be right there. And then he gets off the walkie, he's like, they're done for.
They're it's so just screwed.
like, and that was like, oh goodness. Okay. And then, you know, even though they only have 5 minutes left, suddenly they come up with this montage of building making the cannon work again. And, you know, like, I do like that, is it Bunya, her uncle, that was part of the, this part of the Mudhalven contingent. He basically is like, oh, I was the most popular. Sorry.
Wasn't the popularity that helped him build a cannon.
Right. He's like, I was the most popular because I could figure out how to do things. And
top of his class in his engineering batch.
Yeah, Banu, and he was like, well, up until I became, and Sanvi's like, my dad's lapdog, and he's like, yes, your dad's lapdog. I mean, there was like these moments.
But before that, I was actually a very well-known engineer.
Yeah. So
either way, his engineering degree helps him put nails in a cannon and load it with gunpowder. It's not like he doesn't actually MacGyver or anything, as far as I can tell.
Right.
But that cannon shot is pretty badass.
It is. And look, the other parts of this film, in terms of like how they treat the zombies, it's like sometimes they're indestructible and sometimes they're destructible with nails from a cannon. Mm-hmm. And it seems as if fire has like an effect on them. So, which made me wonder why Punya and Akbar didn't use some of the gasoline and some of the fire they still had to try to like deal with those zombies at the gate. So there's like, so there seems like that happened, but again, it's like I still overall thought it was great. I just
still have to address Vikram's one-liner after the cannon shot. Yeah, this is what you call a hard Brexit, motherfuckers.
Yeah, I was like, okay, wow, interesting.
I mean,
yeah. And then that's the thing. It's like I really thought Sarohi Vikram was gonna be. I thought he was gonna be the hero up until they revealed what actually happened with the little girl, and then I was like, oh well, then clearly he's gonna die. But he redeems himself to an extent. He gets them out of the barracks. He's coming up with a plot to save Sanvi, which is what he promised Alu. And he makes good on his promise to Alu because she had been, zombified. That was a pretty creepy scene, although it wasn't clear to me
the counting?
Why. Well, the counting thing was, I figured they were going to go and do something like that the way it happened, because I
just figured that Akbar was going to be missing off the back of the chain or something.
I just felt like I didn't think it was going to be her necessarily. I thought it might be but maybe they were saving Londoc for later. But I did think that was an interesting thing, although it didn't make sense to me that she wouldn't have attacked them earlier. But basically he takes her out, as he had promised that she wouldn't be one of those things. So I had some hope for him. And he seems
he beats her in a like a standoff.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't always expect that. It's also a little weird that when she's saying 6, she's right behind Akbar.
Right.
And then when he walks over to her, she's like standing several feet away, facing away, so the reveal of her zombie face. Right. It felt a little bit over the top. Like you could have just had her say 6, start attacking, get killed. I don't know. It felt a little precious that they had to spend this whole time together.
Well, I mean, she's a big character, and their relationship was important. I think they also wanted to show the similarities between her and the Betaal statue and the makeup. So I thought there was that. But this doesn't... Okay, so this is why the hypnotizing thing didn't make so much sense to me, because she's clearly trying to do that with him. I think that's where they were going with the weird little voice, and then suddenly she, like, the mind games and things like that. So it felt weird that if he could sort of see through that and take care of business with her, it felt weird to me that Tyagi would have had that same effect on him, because he already is doubting Tyagi. Like, he's been doubting this all along. Like, I don't know that his loyalty to her is going to hold. He seems to be much more loyal to Alu. So that was a plot hole that really bothered me in this. But anyway, that's where they took it. And then suddenly he is Lindoc's, like, lapdog, and
while Punia and Akbar have gone to meet the CM, which is apparently a chief minister. It took me a long time. I had to just Google it eventually. It didn't take me that long to Google it, but I was like, I don't know why they keep bringing up CM, and I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. But chief minister. So chief minister's forward guard arrive at 4:30 a.m. That's a tough gig, and they're trying to find Boz Squad. I thought that was a pretty interesting little fake jump scare where they're like, the guys aren't moving, they could be anything,
Yep,
and they walk
yep.
up and they're fine, but then they won't keep their gosh darn voices down. But I feel like they were already dead because the zombies had made it under their car without them noticing.
Yeah,
they were
a lot of
around.
them were under the car. Don't you think they would have made a little noise under there? I don't know. It just felt...
And you know what? At the end of the day, these aren't zombies so much as they are demons with
True.
some zombie attributes. So
True.
A lot of the regular rules don't apply to these guys.
Right. But, and then there's, Punya just takes care of business. I like her character a lot. She's just like, okay, I'm not going to stay in this car. I'm going to take care of everything. And she, and then she gets back in the car after basically, like, taking care of all the zombies that are around the car. And Akbar is just kind of like, yeah, I'm glad we didn't have to face you. And, so this, and again, like, they are an interesting little team to have together.
They are, because they seem to be regularly at each other's throats, but ultimately I think Akbar does realize that he's not nearly as badass as her.
No, I know.
To the point where he actually like tries to peace out. He's like, I still have a family, I need to go, and this is not my fight, I'm out of here. And that's after they actually have realized that Sarohi is turned bad. His hair is not quite as white as Tiagi's. I think they needed to put more talcum powder in there, or whatever. He doesn't quite have the same look. But yeah, so Akbar's like, you know what? I'm not really into this anymore. I'm going to take off. And Punya goes with a bomb in one hand and a lighter in the other. And she's like, this is how I'm going to get in here.
And she basically, she calls him a coward. And she's just like, but look, ultimately she wants to take care, she wants to rescue Sanvi, but she wants to take care of Lindok. And we do have, again, Sanvi's going through she's going to have some major trust issues at the end of all of this. But she does do exactly what Alu says that she would do. Is she gets through it and she is strong. And she's got like tough undertaking. I mean, she's basically got Vikram Sarohi at her throat with the colonel behind him. At least it's interesting because this was an interesting thing, is that she sees him in the same way that she saw him behind Tiagi, but then he fights him off, and then suddenly the real, like, physical zombie, I guess, whatever you want to call him, of Lindok comes to life and is
floats
really
down from the ceiling.
Yeah, and I mean, it is, again, cheesy effects, the red eyes and the hand and stuff.
His eyes are not nearly as bad as the others.
Yeah, but basically this is all this is leading up to the confession of Sarohi that he had actually done what Tiagi had ordered him to do, and he had killed the little girl in the earlier flashbacks. And no,
I was a little bit disappointed that they threw us so many versions of that story.
Yeah, there's many versions of it, but I mean, I think that was partially meant to show how conflicted he was and how much he was trying to bury that in his head and how much guilt he felt. And, he does ultimately do the right thing. He does fight it off. He fights the colonel off, and he becomes fodder for the zombies. But he basically tells Sanvi that she needs to run and push the button of the bomb. And look, she's got her dad in a cage. I don't think she's as worried about him as she is about Sarohi, but he's definitely done for. He's being consumed. And so she does do exactly that and comes out like all hero-like in a puff of smoke when Punya and Akbar come upon her. But then, they definitely left this. There is the whole idea of this zombie army being all connected to Lindok.
Yeah,
and
Tiagi's able to tell them where things are happening earlier in the show, and when one of them gets hurt, the other ones feel pain, etc. So
right, and all this is connected with the Betaal idol, the Betaal demon, and the demon / the Lindok want a sacrifice of Sanvi or somebody, because this was the sacrifice of, I guess Lindok had done the similar thing to his son. It's unclear to me why this
his
particular
son could not have been a virgin. I mean,
yeah,
probably like 20 something, or maybe he was. Who knows?
But this particular thing, to me, it wasn't clear to me why. Like, I guess just a blood sacrifice would let them loose upon the land. But then apparently, the other thing that lets them loose is a destruction of the altar of the whole thing. So, they definitely left this open for a sequel. And I thought that this was like a very there was, the whole ending with where they find out what's happening in the rest of the country. You think that they're getting out scot-free, and that is not what has happened. So, but the boats coming in, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I like those weird horns that they kept playing every time the
Yep.
redcoats were coming, and when people tried to use the radio, that they would play. I forget what song it was. Even
God
was, like,
save
Rule
it was
Britannia
God.
or God
It
Save
was
the Queen
God
or
save
something.
the Queen. So
It was there were some good sound cues, and I thought the ship's part was good. I think it kind of sucks that you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, you gotta get rid of Line Dock, but you also, hey, don't mess with his sleeping, his altar. That's gonna mess you up even worse. So they are completely screwed. I did like the fact that in episode 3 or 4, I forget which one, Tiagi was saying to somebody like, hey, look, and if Zombie doesn't work out, we're combing the forest for another virgin right now, and so it's
I
going to be
know.
fine. I was so glad that they made that point, because,
Yep.
in things like The Passage, as we talked about, it's like a little far-fetched that there was only one girl,
Right.
one potential person who could be
Right.
the sacrifice. And so at least they paid some attention to that, even though it's apparently the zombies were unable to find an alternate sacrifice for the altar before the end of the film.
But I'm going to point out the big sort of thing that once we read, or once we had Sanvi reading in the book, the fact that the altar being destroyed would unleash them upon the land. Why wouldn't the zombies just have done that? I mean, does that mean just because the colonel would have lost his powers? Because to me, it's like, well, why do we even have to deal with Sanvi or deal with these people in these barracks? If we can just destroy the altar, we get to get out. And
they were in there with the altar the whole time for the last 160 years.
Right. So that, to me, it seems like a pretty big hole to the plot. But
I'm sure there was something in the fine print that said you can't do it yourself. Because otherwise, also, once Sanvi's on the altar, why does Line Dock even need Vikram to do the deed? He could just do it himself.
Right. So that seems weird to me. But anyway.
So it was an interesting show. It has a couple problems, but it was enough fun to keep watching. I think episode 3 was probably one of my favorites.
Yeah,
it just
I
had
liked
so
it.
much frenetic action and crazy one-liners that I really enjoyed episode 3 a lot.
Yeah, me too. And also it had to me it had the most confrontation, and the zombie makeup on Hawk, and and all the stuff to do with Tiagi was super creepy and well done. So I
was very concerned that episode 4 was gonna be. I was like, how can you even have another episode after this? This episode 3 felt like the climax.
Yeah,
and it was. So that I guess is like a bit of a problem with the plot, but they went the like traditional horror route, and they were like, well, now with our very whittled cast, we will have the face off with the big bad, who had been until this point Tiagi and Mudhalvin, and then when they're sidelined, they bring in Line Dock. But I think so I preferred episode 3. I've been doing a little bit of light reading on East India Company, and I think it's important actually to paint this organism as an evil entity, which is what the writer was trying to do.
Yep.
Like, this was a private company that ruled a country, and they had a bigger army and a bigger navy than the actual British Empire at the height of their existence. They were an example of like rampant capitalism left to just do whatever the hell they wanted in the search for profits and greed. And I think, hell yeah, these guys should be painted as some sort of like horrible creeping disease of death, Well,
they were. And I also think that the exploitation of the people of India during that time is something that it's still playing into their history, and it's still things that they are talking about. In terms of like you've been to Amsterdam, right?
Yes.
Well, one of the interesting things that they have is about like if you deal with their spice trade and their history, it's not a pretty history, but the difference is that they are very forthright about it, and they actually have laws about how things are presented about slavery and about the spice trade and the exploitation that happened. I don't know that the UK does the same thing. In terms of sort of owning up to some of the horrible things that colonialism did. You know, it's so like I just think, yeah, they talk about it, but not in sort of the way that, like, when we were in Amsterdam, there were very specific narratives that were on the wall. Similarly, there was like a whaling museum, or like their sort of like nautical museum that talks about whaling in very like unflattering terms to the Dutch. So it's interesting to see that sort of the difference in how people are filtering history. So I definitely think that they should be painted in this way. Absolutely. And, you know, they mention in this film the Indian Rebellion of 1857. And this is, you know, and they talk a lot about Lyndoch wanting this power, and this particular regiment wanting this power. And basically the what they call the there was an unsuccessful uprising that the British quelled, and it was pretty horrible. Like, there were so many atrocities, which they are mirroring in this particular film, is like the assassination and massacres of civilians, and it was just a horrible time. And this ultimately led to the East India Company was abolished in it was
after 1857. That's when
it was. I think it was 1858 that it was abolished, or 1859. I'd have to look it up. But in any case, it just was a horrible part of this history. And so I think that they are shedding light on that, but also basically
cautionary tale.
Yeah, cautionary tale. But also, it's like, honestly, it's like, well, what has changed? And if we are looking at this particular story, even though it's a zombie film, how this particular company, the Boz company, is the issues that they are having, and how they are being asked to do these atrocious things. So I think that was definitely a theme that they were trying to really
it's not a subtle
home.
theme.
No.
It's definitely a major theme. And it's interesting to me that this show would have such parallels with a lot of the zombie content we see coming out of South Korea, because Train to Busan also had a very strong anti-corporate greed message.
Yep.
So and you know what, so, well, not corporate greed, but greed and anti-environmentalism was the center of Blood Quantum also. So it's nice to see a lot of strong themes in this content that's coming out these days. I like it.
Right. And so I really actually enjoyed this miniseries. I recommend it. I think people will enjoy it if they're into this genre of things. It's nice to see such an amazing cast. I would watch the sequels to this. I know who knows if they are going to do that, but it seems as if they are at least trying to tee it up for that. But I liked it, and I'm glad we got to watch it and review it.
TK. So that's Betaal. Next time we are going to be going to New Zealand. Such international.
Right. So join us next time when we watch The Deadlands, which the series on Shudder. We're going to be looking at the first couple of episodes and take it from there. In the meantime, if you watched Betaal and enjoyed it, or had comments about it, please send us an email, reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. Leave a note on our site, reanimatedpodcast.com, or you can tweet at us. reanimatedpcast is the handle. And until next time, stay safe, be well, and thank you again for listening. Ciao.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.